Hello and welcome to the second tutorial on how to program in C#. First things we're going to do is open the Visual Studio app and start a new project. Let's just clicking Start Without Code, and you'll be greeted with a blank environment. From here we'll go to File, New, Project, and we'll make sure we select C# from the drop down list. You'll normally get greeted with all languages. That's not necessarily helpful. So in this case we're going to ensure use C#. Let's go to Windows format. I'll click Next. Give it a simple name such as my project or my first project, whatever you want. You can change the save location to somewhere else. I'm going to keep it as this for now. In reality, you're better off saving it into your documents folder or something else. If that's the case, click Browse and just scroll to a folder that you prefer. Documents, whatever. Make sure you place the solution and project in the same directory. And don't worry about the framework, that's not too important right now. Hit Create. Right, once you've created the project, you'll be greeted with the form design view. This includes your blank form, and we'll use that later on to add some controls to it and obviously start building our program. Secondly, you'll see the Solution Explorer, which contains all the program files in your program. Your form file, the program file, etc. The program CS file contains sort of the initialization, main functions and other things that you'll need to deal with things like global variables and initialization of your forms. Really though, that's not too important right now. The form1.cs is actually a form. There is a back end to this which has all the code inside of it, but for now we're only really interested in the front end of the form. Your next part is the properties window. This contains all the properties for each control. But now this is dealing with the Windows form itself. But when we add some controls to it later on, it will actually provide us with the ability to change certain attributes of that control without having to change it in our code, which can be quite a time saver. Now, the most important thing you need to do is open up the toolbox. If you scroll to the left hand side, you'll see toolbox here. Just click that, and it will help to pin it to the side. That way you won't lose it. By default, it will come open completely empty like this, but just click all Windows forms or common controls, whatever, and it will provide a drop down list of all the tools you can use. For now, we're going to just pull a button onto our thing, just click and drag and drop that in there. We're going to search for a text box, because we're able to search as well, and grab a text box. Make sure you get a text box, not a rich text box, they are different. And we'll get a label as well. Now you might notice when you move these things around that a little bar appears that helps you center and change where things appear. This just helps you lay your project out. It won't do any harm with setting a form up. It'll just help you align things. Now, talking about the properties window, if we click on label, we'll notice that it has three key things that are of interest to us. First, it has its name, which is label 1. It has the text, which is also label 1. And the third thing is actually a long list of other properties we can change, most of which you'll probably never need to worry about, but some may well be important to you at a later date. For now, all we're really interested in is the text attribute, because calling it label 1 is pretty undescriptive. So we'll change it to, let's say, number entry. And we'll just center it again to make sure it looks nice. There we go. Now you may notice the name hasn't changed, it's still called label 1. That's because the text attribute we've changed, which is here, is what is displayed to the user. What the actual control is called, in this case label 1, doesn't change. It's something the user never sees. It's what we use to access it in the program. So if we scroll through, we'll eventually come on to something that says name. There it is in the design tab. And it's called label 1. That's a pretty undescriptive name. In programming we like to use names that are descriptive. In other words, they make it clear what the function is of the item we're using. So in this case we've got a number entry label, so we could just put user prompt. For our name. In reality you could use anything, but let's keep it descriptive. User prompt. Very simple. So you notice it's changed the name here, which means if we call it in the code, or we try to access the variable or value in the code, we'll find it's called user prompt, not called something else like label 1. Now that control is sorted. The text box again, not again very descriptive at text box 1, so we can do exactly the same thing. Find name, and we're going to change our text box 1 to, let's say, user number entry. Yep, we'll go with that for now. So now we've got user prompt, user number entry, and then button 1. So button 1 again is quite a silly thing to have displayed to the user, so we'll just change the text value to submit, and we'll scroll down until we find the name, and we'll call it number entry button. And there we go, number entry button. Now a unique feature in Visual Studio is the ability to double click a control to access the code. So what I'm going to do now is double click the submit button, and that will take me to the number entry button click method. Now the click method is, as you may have guessed, the method that is run when you click the button. Now methods are simply blocks of code that are run and do a particular function. In this case, private void number entry button is a block of code that is run whenever you click the button, and that's used for things like submitting things or making sure that the program progresses to the next stage. So yeah, there's a variety of different functions or methods that are used inside C#, and this method here, the button click method, is just one of many. For instance, we have the public form class, which is essentially an initializer class, which sets up our form, and if we were to click other buttons in our program, we'd get generating a large number of methods as well. But for now, we're going to stick everything inside of our current button 1 click method just to simplify our program. So we do all of our stuff inside this button 1 click method. So I'm going to skip through to get something working just so you can see what happens. So what we're going to start off by doing is we go back to our form. We know we've called this user prompt, we've called this number entry, user number entry, and we called this number entry button. Now a little tip, if you ever forget where you are in the code, double click the control you want to change the method of, and it will jump you straight back to where the method is in the code. Now I'm going to type in user number entry, and as you can see, it automatically comes up in the box here what the options are. In this case, user number entry is our variable or our object that controls the text entry box. So we double click that, it accesses our control directly. Now what we're interested in at the moment is the .text value, because this object has multiple, because essentially the text box itself is known as an object, and this gives us the ability to use different members of that object, which basically is the same way of saying if you've got a human, which is just, you know, your one object, they could have several different parts of their identity, such as the name, their height, their weight. All these things are different members or values associated with that object. In this case, we're interested in the text values associated with the text box, which is where all the text is stored. Now currently it is blank, but there will be some text at some point. but as you can see I've actually misspelt number. So what we can do is, rather than change it here, we go back to our form and change the name value when I find it. There we go. You'll notice a very unique feature. Just change it to be correct. Go back to our form, and there you go. It automatically updates it for us, which is a nice little feature. Now this is supposed to be a number entry, so I'm going to make sure I convert it to a number. So first off, I need a little thing called a variable. Don't worry too much about what that is for now. We'll just call it my number. And we'll get to equal the value of text box. Now, you'll be aware there's a red line to this because you cannot convert what is a string to an int. Now, that's not important right now. It's just important to be aware of the fact that your .text value inside of your user number entry is a text representation, so it's in English language. But if you're doing a number, that's actually a whole number, and they're different data types. So we have to do something called converting it, and luckily C# offers a very unique way of doing this. We just type convert dot to int32, and that's it. We put it inside some brackets. Make sure you don't use the curly brace here, make sure you use the normal brackets, and end it with semicolon. The key thing to remember with this is semicolons end most statements inside of C# and most other languages. So be aware when you write a line of code you end it with a semicolon. It's called a termination symbol, and essentially you want to make sure that you terminate each statement or line of code with a semicolon, so don't forget to include that. Now what we've got here is int my number convert to int32 user number dot text. Basically what this means is grab the value from this text box, chuck it into this value here, turn it into a number, and then pass it to my number. Now be aware we've got no validation here at all, which means we don't check the value, so if you put text in here it will break. So when we use this program, only enter a number for now. And we want to see if we got the right value, so we use something called a message box. And we'll just type in message box dot show, and we'll chuck in there my number. Annoyingly, C# doesn't have any implicit conversions. It will not automatically change a data type from one to the other. So even though we had to turn this into a number to put it into a variable, we'll have to turn it back into another string before we can send it. So we'll scroll through till we find string. There it is. Problem solved. And now it's a string. And with a semicolon. Now this is a bit redundant, this bit of code at the moment, because we are basically taking text, turning it into a number, and turning it back to text. There's a reason why I'm doing that, and you'll see in later tutorials why. For now, let's just see if we've managed to get our message box to show whatever we've got stored in number. We can do that by running the program. So we go back to our form1.cs, hit S to save it all, and click start. You haven't got to go back to form 1 to start a program, it just looks cleaner. Hit start, and the program will now start. Ignore AVG complaining. There we go. I've turned it off. Right, so we now see form 1 comes up, and what you can then do is typing a number, let's say 55, hit submit, you get a message box showing 55. So as you can see, we can now make a program that could run, take in user entry, and display it to the screen. In the next tutorial we'll work on data types and variables and why they're important in a program. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.